Hello there. Thank you for watching again. On this drive, we are continuing the November 2019 reading from Road and Track magazine, The Dead Fleet, poking at the underwater bones of old war in a Grand Wagoneer. We were barely an hour from Washington, D.C., but you wouldn't have known it. That tangle of politics and congestion was replaced with quiet cornfields and rolling pasture. Deer Pond at the edge of the pavement, eyeing us as we trundled by in a 1988 Jeep Grand Wagoneer, the old 360 V8 pulling us towards a hidden graveyard. We were headed to Mallows Bay, Maryland, the final resting place for more than 100 old steamships, all left to rot in the mud of the Potomac. Those ships were built during World War I at the peak of a panic. German U-boat submarines were sinking American supply vessels in the Atlantic at an astonishing rate. Between 1914 and 1918, Germany put nearly 5,000 Allied vessels at the bottom of the sea. The number now seems inconceivable, but the subs were a fresh horror with no countering force, one of several newly perfected weapons of war. Desperate to keep men and materials moving to the front, the United States embarked on an unprecedented shipbuilding spree, contracting 1,000 vessels from yards in 17 states, with a requested completion time of just 18 months. This shipbuilding operation was one of the most expensive in history, and it was an outright failure. None of the vessels saw service, as Germany surrendered long before the first was finished. By the end of 1918, only 134 ships had been completed, with another 260 half-built. Because their hulls had been commissioned in wood, rather than more expensive steel, they were immediately obsolete, leaky, too small to be effective oceanic transport, and inefficient in the face of new diesel-powered craft. The government couldn't give them away. Most were towed to a shallow bay in the Potomac and forgotten. Like those ships, the Grand Wagoneer on these pages should have long ago returned to the earth. Jeep's first mass appeal SUV rewired America's thinking on the category, shifting it from bare bones utility to the bastion of suburban mobility. From Explorers to Forerunners and Range Rovers to Cayennes, the modern SUV segment essentially owes its existence to this machine. Built on a platform that survived three parent companies in nearly 30 years, it became a symbol for 1980s affluence before flickering from existence in 1991. The cause of death was a high MSRP, abysmal fuel economy, and the road mannerism of a truck engineered in the early 60s. Stephen Best bought this one on a lark. He grew up watching his father pine for a Grand Wagoneer of his own, a dream that never saw reality. 5 years ago, the younger Best was clicking through eBay when he found a listing for a champagne-colored 88 in Florida. He put in a low bid and went to bed. An email notification the next morning announced that the Jeep was his. Best is a white-collar defense attorney working outside Washington. His days are full of decisions that change the course of people's lives. He seems to carry this fact on his shoulders and broadcast it in how he considers his words. The Wagoneer may have entered his life as a nostalgic click, but these days it's more than that. Quote, I can go back to the 80s. When you're a kid, you're carefree. For every man, there's a struggle between that era and the time when everyone asked you for advice. This truck's vacuum seals me from the world, end quote. Maybe that's why it recently spent more than a year at Wagon Master, the Caryville, Texas company that's been restoring Jeeps like Best for 25 years. Best wanted his truck to be as close to perfect as possible, and he wanted it painted in the deep midnight blue it now wears. The Jeep had already been to Wagon Master once, 6 years before Best found it. As a rule, the shop cherry picks low-mile survivors, then goes through them stern to stern. If that seems like an odd treatment for an 80s Chrysler four-wheel drive, consider that Wagoneer values have increased by about 20% a year for a decade. A prime unrestored example will now set you back more than 40 grand, and Wagon Master's inventory is littered with price tags twice that number. On the surface, it flies in the face of logic. While these were once luxury vehicles, they weren't exactly rare. They were castaways from an era of excess, and it wasn't long ago that you could snag the title of one with little more than a kind word and a smile. While the Wagoneer's exterior remained timeless, the truck's interiors aged poorly, as only an 80s Chrysler can. Most were either driven into the ground or parked, left to rot when fuel prices turned skyward. Best trucks seemed built for the roads near the Mallows boat ramp. Empty two lanes turned through close forest as the pavement inked over gentle hills. At 4,300 pounds and with 144 horsepower slugging through a 3-speed automatic and a full-time four-wheel drive system, the Grand Wagoneer has no patience for speed. It is unhurried but not frustrating. You simply plod along joyously on a small swell of torque. Best laughed at the revolution. Quote, I don't need to go 130 miles an hour anymore, he says. My life is 130 miles an hour, end quote. The cabin is a stark disconnect from the exterior, where chrome and sheet metal scream 1960s style. Inside, the goofy padded steering wheel, the overhead console plucked from a Chrysler van, and the parts bin controls feel out of place. but it's all in perfect condition, squared away by patient Texans. Few things from the 80s have aged well, but after a couple miles, you accept the beige plastic as part of the charm. Best had Wagon Master address some issues with the truck, including replacing the V8's old carburetor with fuel injection. A quick eye on the spotless engine bay would be hard-pressed to see the differences, but the truck starts and idles with zero drama. Even after Wagon Master's fiddling, the Jeep's steering wanders, leaving you to chase the nose like a river pilot, constantly adjusting to the road's current. And as with any good boat, you have to learn to let go, accept that you only have so much control, and trust that the universe will get you where you're going. Take a hand off the wheel and let your elbow find the open window. Just past dawn, the bay was beautiful. Still water reaching toward Virginia with one forgotten hulk of a ship clearly visible. We unloaded the canoe and pushed off. We'd missed low tide by about an hour, and the Potomac was already busy overtaking those old beams. Forests of hydralia, an invasive and prolific aquatic weed, obscured most of the hulls and slowed our paddling. When they parted, there were massive timbers and steel visible, reaching to the river bottom. We'd paddle a bit, then realized we were directly over the bones of some old shipwreck. The only sound, the slap of water against our hull. There was an effort to clean up Mallows Bay in the 1950s, but by then, a thriving ecosystem had established around the wreck. Salvage companies had used the bay as maritime junkyard for decades, and the original fleet of World War I vessels had been augmented by everything from retired barges and car ferries to 18th century schooners and a Revolutionary War era longboat. Their beams returned sediment to the bay and provided shelter for plants and fish, when in turn brought birds. This year, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, the state of Maryland, and Charles County worked together to designate an 18 square mile area surrounding the bay as a marine sanctuary, country's first new one in nearly 20 years. We'd like to think of utility as a fixed thing. The way a canoe's purpose has not drastically changed in the 10,000 years since the first touched water, but time has a way of changing everything. Vessels once built to feed a war are transformed into a peaceful refuge. An old SUV goes from bougie Carriot to throwaway wreck and then vintage prize. Machines like Best's Grand Wagoneer are so compelling, not for the way they drive, but for how eager they are to take us backward, to give us a glimpse of who and where we once were, sanctuaries of their own. How they got there. Western Marine and Salvage Company bought the ships that now lie on the bottom of Mallows Bay in 1922, towing them to Widewater Bay on the Virginia side of the Potomac. The plan was to remove all onboard machinery, then burn the wooden hulls. But locals protested, worried that the process could damage the river's fisheries. In 1924, Western Marine towed the vessels to Mallows Bay, where it began working quickly, burning 31 ships on one day in 1925. But the combination of plummeting scrap prices and the looming depression caused Western Marine to declare bankruptcy 6 years later, leaving the dead fleet behind. Chasing the Silkway, on the ground and giving chase in one of the world's most remote rallies. The two men had been awake since 5 a.m., and if they planned to make it to tomorrow's special stage, rest wouldn't come for hours. One tried to nap, but it's only easy to sleep strapped into a bucket seat with a 5-point harness. Ido Bauer, Cristiano Berni, and their camera equipment were stuffed into a 1999 Toyota Land Cruiser Prado built to document desert rally competitions like the Silkway. The race has been around since 2009, still largely unknown in the United States. The 3,000 plus mile, 9-day event recently added motorcycles and quads. This year's running was the first to venture into Mongolia. The rally set off from the Russian-Siberian capital of Irkutsk to the ski town of Bakalslik, then skirted the shores of Lake Baikal before crossing into the East Siberian city of Ulan-Ude. From there, entrants turned south, traversing the span of central Mongolia, crossing the Gobi Desert, and finishing in northern China. The photographers had arrived in Russia a few days ahead of the race to adjust the time zone and sort out Bauer's truck and customs. Irkutsk is a surprisingly modern city with just a hint of USSR hidden in its folds. The temporary Silkway headquarters at the local university was alive with incoming participants, competitors, mechanics, volunteers, city officials, and the press, most of whom were ready for a grueling ride through Eurasia. Bauer and Barney have had more than 2 decades of motorsport photography experience between them. They should be jaded, hardened by countless days standing in the sun, getting drenched by the inevitable rainstorm, or dealing with the political nonsense that accompanies applying for press credentials. But their passion for the craft gives them enough of a reason to view their profession existentially, finding fulfillment in the job's hardships. Sleeping on the ground means seeing the stars. Waking up early to explore the race course before the ride and driver start lets you watch the sunrise. Being forced to fend for yourself outside the bovine gives you the chance to taste regional dishes and meet the locals. Outside Bakalsik, a group of kids, no older than 11, pulled up to the Park Prado on worn-out bicycles. The tornado of Russian words that followed rendered the Italians speechless until someone had a bright idea. Google? The oldest boy pulled out his cell phone, shaking with excitement. Google Translate came to their rescue, the children asking for autographs. When Bauer told them that they were just photographers, not racers, the kids asked to take pictures with them instead. All the while, the phone facilitated small talk, the group asking about everything from the Prado to Pikachu, which Google translated from a young girl's explanation as, "This hare is a hare with yellow ears." Across Mongolia and China, the Prado was often mistaken for a competition vehicle. The Italians were heroes. Rallies like Dakar and the Silkway require every vehicle coming within a meter of the course to meet racing standards. The Toyota was no exception. Bauer purchased the truck in 1999 and almost sold it last year after repairing a few long-suffered electrical issues, but he didn't have the heart. Instead, it got a Rally Raid makeover. Bauer's mechanic cut the front bumper, added a snorkel, fresh wheels and tires, a skid plate, and beefed up the suspension. On top is an aluminum roof rack with waterproof hard cases and a spare tire. There's another spare on the back. The Italians loaded the truck with other accessories, including traction sticks, canisters, a slew of tools, tool straps, a fire extinguisher, and a set of safety hammers taped to the cage. A package of LED lights was fixed to the interior and exterior. But that's all standard chase truck fare. Inside, the Prado is a mobile photo studio with a power inverter or refrigerator and custom cubbies. A foldaway table is attached to the door, and blackout curtains run along an upper track, allowing the rear passenger seats to be separated from the cab. The curtains offer the sort of shade needed to hunker down in front of a computer to edit the hundreds of photos the two take each day. They shoot for motorsports teams, each of which has an insatiable appetite for photos. The rallies are grueling, 10 to 15 stages each and hundreds of miles per day. The photographers must make sacrifices. This mostly means sleep. They wake up before everyone else to seek out shooting locations well before the racers can reach them. They snap pictures from morning to afternoon, then find coffee, maybe lunch. They're on the gas again until sunset, the whole time editing photos behind the curtains. When they land, they doze on a cot next to the Prado. It usually works out to about 3 to 5 hours of shut-eye, if they're lucky. Cristo has one beer and then he's dreaming, Bauer says. Me, it's not so easy. Bauer is short, with a lively spirit that makes it hard to pinpoint his age. He seems unstoppable, hardly giving in to fatigue. His bronze skin, silvery hair, and ambiguous pronunciations recall advertising's most interesting man in the world. A master of 5 languages and conversational in a few more, he speaks with a barely detectable Italian accent. He prefers to listen intently and respond thoughtfully. When he does talk, he's careful and to the point, level in expression and kind in tone. Despite co-owning the media outfit Rally Zone with Barney since 2006, Bauer hasn't picked up every good habit his old friend has developed on the job, but his skills shine bright. After 20 years of photographing motorsports and having competed in small-town rallies himself aboard a Yamaha XT600Z Tenere motorcycle, he's proficient at decoding the hieroglyphs of a road book and even better at surveying his environment, noticing weather patterns, gauging daylight, reading the topography, negotiating rigorous terrain. He's also developed patience, which can be hard to muster after days in the truck. Barney is tall and lanky, similarly tan, with an angular nose and a soft chin. His broad and toothy smile shows often. Even on day 9 of the Silkway, when everyone's fire had nearly gone out, he could muster a happy face. He too is multilingual, by necessity, having to speak French, Spanish, and English at events. After his introduction into the Silkway Rally, he has considered adding Chinese, Mongolian, and Russian to the list. He and Ito has worked together long enough to know each other's limits. He overpacks, Barney says, and takes too much time to get ready, but he's quite easy to deal with. The race blitzed through Russia and veered south into the Mongolian-Manchurian steppe, a place of mesmerizing nothingness. The photographers and their Land Cruiser followed. There, the heavily wooded forest of Siberia opened into rolling green and champagne-colored plains, unrestricted by trees or plant life. Most of the buildings were the circular girs of the nomads, their ancient shapes contrasted by roof-mounted satellite dishes and the lifted Priuses often parked near the doors. In Mongolia, the race became fast, with wide, clear roadways that gave riders and drivers a space to go flat out. When we caught up with the former motocross star and Husqvarna factory racer Andrew Short, he made it clear that the riding was far from what he's accustomed to. "It was really fast, more than my comfort," he said. "It's just not my specialty. It's more like road racing, but I like the flow of the course. I didn't see anybody all day." The new countryside posed the same problems for the media. High speed often leads to increased errors. One thing goes wrong, and a flying Komatsu, a factory support truck converted for racing, can burst over the horizon and turn you into a speed bump without so much as a glance in your direction. But the Italians kept their focus, and no one wound up under a race vehicle. Finally, China brought some much-needed familiarity for both racers and photographers. Massive sand dunes slipped under their feet as each group ascended to their separate vantage points, not so different from their days in the Dakar and on similar terrain. The amateurs had a harder time of it, but the pros excelled. Even Short found his rhythm to the dunes, clinching his first career stage win. For many, the road of Rally Raid is unapproachable. The sport is tough to enter, and for good reason. It's no place for beginners. Those who pass the initial evaluations often won't cross the starting line, held back by financial burdens, time constraints, or the mental drain of competing head-to-head with professional athletes. The landscape is likewise intimidating, dispensing various trials throughout each undisclosed special stage with a published service route, the sole clue as to what you might face along the way. Enthusiasts and locals alike meet similar challenges trying to catch a glimpse of big names, their compatriots, or those magnificent Kamaz trucks plowing the earth at blistering speed. A mass start in the blinding white dunes can feel like a snowy Star Wars battle scene, but that's exactly why you go, to witness controlled mayhem in exotic locations, armed with nothing but a mobile hotspot, some water bottles, a Snickers bar, and your wit, to stimulate those dormant genes that tell us we're meant to travel and put ourselves to the test, even if that test is just pointing at camera's lens. Comfort is a drug, and if you're not careful, it can steal your life before the Kamaz gets the chance. This year's Soakway came to an end with stiff drinks, celebration, a smorgasbord of food, and a slightly awkward European dance party. The burdens of competition were finally lifted, and those who survived the rally's 9 stages prepared for the journey home. But before Bauer and Barney could say goodbye to their motorsports family, they needed to send their most trusted friend through customs, making the Prado comfy in its shipping container for the trek back to Italy. The Toyota suffered a few scars along the way, all repairable. It pushed past the challenges, endured many miles on crumbling roadways, and allowed the Italians to focus on their job, a perfect tool for the task at hand. A trials bike and a RAV4 take us to school. It was just before dawn on the Pines to Palms Highway in California's San Bernardino National Forest. The 2019 Toyota RAV4 Adventure was leading through long corners, comfortably insulated from the morning chill, while an OSET 24.0 racing bounced around in the cargo area. It's an electric trials bike, equipped with a lithium-ion battery and adjustable suspension that would be at home on high-end downhill bicycles. It's a spindly and purposeful machine, and like its gasoline-powered kin, it omits anything that might add weight, including the seat. The OSET carves a delicate line between playing and serious training tool, bicycle, and motorcycle. The three of us were reporting for duty at Gary LaPlante's Moto Ventures dirt bike school in Anza, California. The 350-acre campus is one of a few places in the U.S. that offer a formal trials racing curriculum. We were making the track because I'm convinced that understanding a trials bike isn't so different from understanding a car. Trails riding is beautiful. Practitioners seem to defy gravity, making impossible things look easy. Spaniard Tony Bow, who has dominated the sport since 2007, will take off from a standstill and climb a head-high vertical wall. He might stop at the top, turn his machine 90 degrees, then leap a gap of 6 feet, landing on a phone book-sized obstacle, all on his rear wheel. It's spectacular precision, like a driver threading a narrow section of a rally course or a perfect hole shoot from a grid start. LaPlante is middle-aged and desert-tanned. He slapped on sunscreen as students clanked through built-out shipping containers packed with neat rows of helmets, jerseys, and knee pads. He watched, herding the class towards the late-model Yamaha WR250s. If trials technique is the foundation of LaPlante's school, the hard-used Yamahas are the bricks. It would take a passing grade after a day of riding exercises on the 4-stroke dirt bikes to get a shot at the trials bike Exotica the next morning. We started with drills, and it didn't take long for LaPlante to come after me. He'd been nodding with approval as one bike after the next turned tightly in the loose dirt. First the high school kid, then the freshly minted engineer. Each set up a tidy arc through the corner, then dipped the bike low before throttling out. I came in too hot, standing upright off the seat, but I'd been compliant. My elbows had dropped, my shoulders were off square. My arc stretched into a sine wave as I tried to gather it all up. LaPlante, amused, took a long stride into the corner, pacing me, then shoved the motorcycle under me, forcing it down. There was a moment of panic, but the bike shifted lower and my turn smoothed and sharpened. Lesson learned. You'll hear the same things and learn similar skills at the driving school. Smoothness, threshold braking, line selections, keeping your eyes up, scanning, aimed where you want to go. Everything from using throttle and brake to shifting weight to help the machine's suspension do its work. We climbed scrabbly hills and kept the throttle pinned through sandy washes. Every set of exercises was punctuated by an increasingly challenging trail ride. And with every new skill, these rides got faster. Adrenaline can only keep fatigue at bay for so long. My thighs, unaccustomed to the constant work of standing on foot pegs, started to ache. Everything else followed. But things were clicking. Our trips to the single track trails got longer, and stops to pick up bikes and riders out of the dirt got shorter. Sore muscles encourage an economy of movement and energy retention at all costs. Tugging a 250-pound motorcycle out of the dusty brush is hell on both. LaPlante is keen on conservative riding, on being a steward of trails. So little of a motorcycle's tire touches the ground that it's easy to spin the rear. But that churning, rut-digging style of riding is theoretical to LaPlante's trials-derived approach, which emphasizes control and traction. His attention to that detail shows. Despite a constant stream of motorcyclists, the trails cut through the thick brush are even and walkable, not the deep furrow many would expect to see at an off-road school. We rode through a cone slalom, fast and standing, more practice for the sand wash. We tackled a long, slick metal plank, testing our balance and our focus. Exhausted, dusty, and desperately in need of a beer, we finally packed it in. While the rest of the class sensibly headed towards home, I aimed the RAV4 at the hills, contemplating more riding. The Toyota's 203 horsepower four-banger droned along somewhere under a Bakersfield country soundtrack, and a nudge kept the 8-speed auto in sport mode, holding gears a little longer for the undulations up and out of Anza. A fire road crawls up the back of Palomar Mountain. Seemed like a great place to go and let my limbs rest. Climbing through the ruts and over boulders, the RAV4's adventure proved to be a surprise. Now on its 5th generation, the crossover has always been honest about its place in the world. But the adventure package is a big reach out of the economy ute market. In a nod to off-road ability, it includes driver-selectable terrain modes and Toyota's dynamic Toyota vectoring all-wheel drive. You'd expect the system to do economical things, like declutch the shaft powering the rear wheels for improved fuel economy, which it does, but you might not expect it to gladly take on the dirt. Climbing the trail, the RAV4 shuffled tires through the ruts, picking through tough spots with ease. It rides on 19-inch alloy wheels and has perfectly reasonable 8.6 inches of ground clearance. Stone gardens, exposed by California's long and rainy winter, tucked easily underfoot. The next day brought another dawn patrol. LaPlante had his trails bikes out and ready. He favors two-stroke gas machines, both brand new and very old school. Like any purposeful thing, you forgive its sins the instant you put it to work. Each 250cc single-cylinder engine starts with a touch of a choke, a firm kick, and a puff of smoke. Pull one off a stand and it's startlingly light. A hair under 150 pounds, LaPlante says, as the bikes warmed up. We started early, before the sun gets too harsh. Wheelies were the first lesson and they came instantly. A long push with your legs, pressing your weight on the foot pegs. Shift back quickly and you've lofted the front wheel. Then you lift it over a stone, then a branch. Then you're eyeballing a much bigger stone. On the bike, as in a car, timing is everything. There's nothing that speeds along your skills like feedback. In cars with lots of suspension travel, there's always a perceptible response to your inputs. How braking shifts weight forward, how traction goes with it to your frontal tires. How off-road racers will floor just before hitting an object, so that their machines sit back on their haunches and stretch out the suspension for an inevitable impact. You learn timing when you crank the throttle and you can cut it up and dab the brake, freeing up the rear to slide. On the trials bike, with glassy smooth suspension and next to no weight, the feedback is similarly constant and addictive. We worked a hillside for an hour, weaving in and out of boulders, teasing power on and off with a perfectly measured clutch. Even confined to a space no larger than a couple of parking spots, it's diabolical how trails riding makes your brain work as hard as your heart and thighs. We spent the last hour of our day trading the OSET back and forth. LaPlante was impressed with the potential of the little electric bike. It does so many things his competition machines do, but almost silently. It wheelies easily, then picks through tight sections like a dancer. You could ride as hard as you like next to a library, beat yourself to a sweating pulp for an hour, and not even get a finger shaken at you. And when you're done, you toss it in the back of your perfectly reasonable and comfortable SUV. That Moncur never really suited the RAV4s. It always nibbed around the edges of sport and utility. Despite utterly dominating the category for a quarter of a century, it's never been more thrilling than basic transportation. A noble calling, though hardly one to get excited about. This 5th generation transcends those origins. It's as practical as ever, but now the RAV4 also feels game for trying whatever you have planned, toting a trials bike in its carnivorous trunk hundreds of miles over highway and fire road. I'm bringing it all home in the same comfort and quiet, totally unruffled by the effort.